Hi, I'm Ashay. I'm an engineer by training and a storyteller by passion. I made this podcast to talk about data science, but no math, no equations, just intuitions behind data science. The episodes are not in any particular order, and you can just tune into any episode and listen to something related to data science. Let's get started. In this episode, let's talk about the intuition behind neural networks in deep learning. Now, neural networks are basically uh, networks of neurons, and think of a neuron as like a conversion device which takes some input, does some processing on it, and then outputs some signal or an output. So, in my mind, the best way to think about a neural network is think of it as layers of decisions. And that's how we also operate in real life. That's how our brain works as well. We make layers of decisions on a daily basis, and the decisions are related to each other with cause and effect. So I'm just going to jump into a very simple example to explain the intuition behind neural networks. So every single weekend, I go out to eat. I visit a restaurant. I try new dishes, and I'm going to think of me eating out at a particular restaurant as an event, and how I reached that outcome or that event through layers of decisions. That's what I'm going to talk about. And then the whole idea behind all of this is we have the layers of decisions, and every layer, what you are trying to do is you're basically trying to solve a regression problem and a classification problem. So that's just my way of thinking about neural networks. So if the outcome is me eating out at a restaurant, then there are at least three decisions involved in me reaching that outcome, right? So the first decision is I decided to go out, then I decided on a restaurant, and then I decided on a dish that I want to try in that restaurant, right? So those three decisions that I made, and I made them in that sequence. Now, my first decision that I decided to go out was based on some variables or some parameters um, in my life at that moment. And those parameters could be, okay, how much appetite do I have? Then, do I have any particular budget? Then, do I have food at home? Like, do I need to go out to eat? And do I have company to go to the restaurant? Now, these I'm just going to think about just these four variables. Now, these four variables do not have equal weights in my process of decision making. So, like for example, whether there is food at home or not, it doesn't matter. I just want to go out. So the food being at home, that particular node or that particular neuron doesn't necessarily have a particular weight in my decision making. um, do I have company? Yeah, that could have a very significant weight. Do I have appetite? That can have reasonable weight. And do I have any particular budget? Yes. So I don't want to spend, like, let's say $500 on just me on my meal. I may be willing to pay, let's say, $40. So uh, that will constitute the weight for that particular variable. Now, what my brain is doing is it is looking at these four variables: appetite, budget, food being at home, and do I have company, assigning certain weights to them, and coming up with some output for or a result for that scenario. And then, if that output resides below a certain threshold, my decision is going to go in the negative direction. Or if it resides above a certain threshold, I am going to decide in a positive direction to go out to eat, right? So basically what we just did here is my brain did some kind of regression based on these four variables, assigned certain weights to those variables, came up with a result, and then applied a classification problem to that result, whether the result is in a positive direction, goes in the positive direction or the negative direction, based on some threshold that I have for that result, and then went on to the next decision. So next decision is, I decided, let's say the result was in a positive direction and I decided to go out, then I want to decide on a restaurant. Now here you again have different set of variables. So uh, is there any particular place that I want to visit? Is there any particular cuisine that I want to try? Is there Does the ambience of the restaurant matter? What kind of service does it have? Is it like a counter service or a table service? Does the restaurant have good parking? So again, there are certain weights to these variables. Based on these weights, I'm going to come up with a result. If that result resides below a certain threshold, I'm not going to go to that restaurant. If that result is above a certain threshold, then I'm going to choose in a favorable direction and go to that restaurant. And then when I go into that restaurant, then I make the third decision of which dish I want to try. So what we did here is we basically kind of broke down our process of how our brain works in making these decisions, and that's exactly what we do in neural networks. Is we basically um, create a scenario and replicate how neurons within our brain might work in making these layers of decisions in sequence. And for each particular layer, what you are trying to do is you are trying to kind of solve a regression problem with certain variables and weights associated with them. And then on the result, you are going to apply some classification, whether yes, no, or favorable, not favorable. And then based on that result, you are going to go to the next decision. So these particular variables, like in this case, the appetite, for the first decision, it was appetite, budget, food being at home and company. These particular variables are called nodes in the neural network. The first layer of decision is called input layer. The last layer of decision is called output layer, and all the layers in between are called hidden layers. And then the particular weights that I'm applying to these variables are called parameters, or maybe learnable parameters within the neural network. Thanks for tuning in. I made this podcast to talk about intuitions behind data science, and we'll talk about some other idea in the next episode. There will be no math, no equations, just intuitions behind data science. See you soon.